Hi, I'm John with the Muhdo Hub. I'm here with Sam and Adam from the Secret Network. This is episode 2 of the Muhdo Hub podcast, and we're going to dive into everything Secret Network today.
Yeah, and just, a bit of context, Secret were one of the first partnerships that we did when we started building out the Muhdo Hub ecosystem. There's a lot of reasons behind that, but we thought we'd get Adam in here today to really explain everything in a lot more detail so that you guys can understand why we've brought this technology and what this technology is and the value that it's going to offer to our ecosystem and to our customers. So Adam, great to meet you. It's always a pleasure.
Always a pleasure. Never a chore.
Never a chore, yeah. So yes, take it away. I mean, could you start off by giving people a bit of background to the Secret Network and what it is that you guys do and the technology that you guys have built?
Yeah, so Secret's been around a while. Mainnet was established in 2020. Originally focused on our layer 1 chain, which was a Cosmos SDK chain. Over the time, this has now become what we call our decentralized confidential computing layer.
Right.
And what we do with that is we're giving programmable privacy into layer 1, so EVM chains, Solana, etc., etc. And what that means is that there are functions of privacy that can be given to those chains. So, for example, random number generators, private voting, and we can work then across chain. Working with the foundation for about a year, about June, July, I spoke to Lisa, the head of the foundation, and said, look, we're brilliant at technology. We've got an incredibly technical community. I think what we need to get better at is to work on a business development level with founders. What we mean by that is that we know technology plays one thing, but I think a Web3 mentality has always been build it and they come.
Yep.
Right.
If you look at the graveyard of dApps or actual adoption, it doesn't always happen. And I think foundations traditionally have invested grants, time, effort into the technology, but don't necessarily wrap into the business development side of things. I personally have been in the space for about 10 years, have an incredible portfolio of projects that I've worked with, but also have a good black book or Rolodex, if you like, of people that can help make projects happen, whether that's service providers, whether that's individuals that can step into projects. We've cut through the grass, so to speak, because we've met, the good, the bad and the ugly in the space. And so for us, it's about connecting the dots for projects. And when we were sitting there looking at the Builders Program, we're looking at the cohorts, we'd had a very kind of organic outreach, if you like. We'd had Twitter campaigns, et cetera, to bring builders in. Just as I was reviewing the first cohort, almost as if by magic, I was introduced to Sam, who didn't at first go through the formal process, but we just chatted. And meeting the team, I was kind of like, the more they're speaking, I was like, okay, what? Secret hadn't really made a move into DeSci. Right. I'd been watching it from a distance to sort of see, as we say, there was a lot of kind of projects that were making funny noises, but I didn't necessarily believe them. But then when I actually looked into it, I spoke to my wife that night and I said, can I just check your healthcare app? And immediately I could see Muhdo on the screen.
Right.
Because I remember looking on the website and I said, you've got that. I said, oh my God, that's actually...
And that's with Medicash, right?
Medicash, yeah, exactly that. So I started to look at this more and more and I went, oh my God, this is actually a Web3 play that I think works. And the reason I think it works is that there's certain things where sometimes I see Web 2 companies wanting to transition into Web 3, and sometimes they've got it wrong. Right. And I think around the utility token boom that we saw, there were companies that had terrible balance sheets, for example, that suddenly wanted to raise a load of money from a token because it's a lot easier than doing an IPO.
Right.
And so starting to build weird utility into tokens, we saw where that went. NFTs are another example, when people started to think that they could fix or add revenue streams in just from having image rights for someone. We know that's not going to work. So I'm always looking for those kind of light bulb moments where I go, okay, actually, I think this works. And I think when we started to speak and we started to talk about what we could do at Secret, we could immediately see what the low-hanging fruit was about how we could work with you to give your users, the confidential nature that they probably need. Because as you've often said, if you are part of a herpes trial, for example, we don't necessarily, even if that wallet's anonymized, there are people that might see where that's going and start to do the forensics around it. And it could, a risk, right? When we've spoken to people before in the real world, they're saying, well, look, we believe that everything's going to go on chain at some point. We believe that, my clients will be able to hold all of their real world assets represented on chain. But actually, we're concerned about the fact that in the same way I don't show my bank account to someone, that on-chain data makes us vulnerable. And that's what we're all about at Secret. so when we spoke to you, we started to say, okay, well, I think there's something here. And when we started to understand that you are, a virgin layer one, if you like, that has still got the journey to grow. This is an exciting time for us because brand new community, not launched yet. We can get into the weeds at the beginning and help you come up with a plan. And I think when we went dev to dev and we brought our development team in, spoke to your development team, I love being in the room with more clever people than me because they were just sitting there bouncing off. You could see them pausing. You could see the labs team pausing on our side. And before we knew it, we had a work plan that I went, this works for them, but also it works for us because it really puts the kind of line in the sand for us to say, this is a good case study for us in DSI. This is a real use case. It's not that we're rushing towards it and trying to find anything.
Yeah.
And I think that's our philosophy in the Builders Program as well, is that we don't work with volume, we work with quality. Right. And you might say it's a bit of a cop-out because actually, quality is more likely to rise to the top or the cream is more likely to rise to the top.
But you can't give quality to quantity.
Exactly. Right. And I think it's also about how founders respond. And I think we've met founders that have great ideas, get the technology, but don't necessarily, there's something missing. So we can work with that, we can give them, but it's whether they absorb it or not. It's a bit like vitamins, right? So it's about how we saw you respond at the beginning that we knew. I said to, the foundation, I said, look, I'm going to spend a lot of time with these guys, just do as much as I can with them. Lo and behold, fast forward, we've just seen this growth to, an idea, a deck with the real world business growing into a bustling community now we're sitting here with this.
Real
and
products.
It's like, I've met so many people that tell me tomorrow. next year. But everything is being delivered. And I think that's the thing.
Right.
For us, we get very excited by people because people invest in people. Right. We invest our time in people. We invest our money in people. And I think that's one of the things that we felt is our time association has always been very worthwhile with Muhdo because it's like we turn around and say, okay, what's happening with mainnet? Oh, well, there's been some delays. Yeah. Right. Everything is here. And for us, that is great because then we can help boost that and it makes life a lot easier.
And I think you have. I think the Builders Program has been a great help for us. You've introduced us personally into some amazing partners that, we're developing that tech stack. But I think, in the beginning, it was privacy which really attracted us to you. And the partnership, it was a real world use case for that. I mean, this is something that all of our wallet holders, all of our application users, everyone that's a part of the Muhdo journey in some way is going to be a part of the secret journey as well. And I don't think there's that many projects and protocols that have the potential to reach so many people in terms of giving exposure to that technology and real world use cases.
And it's interesting you say as well, because I think what we've seen is that even a year ago, if I was to go around and say, I work for Secret Network, people would say, oh, is that a privacy coin? Right. Is that like Monero or Zcash? Why are you still listed on Binance? Haven't you been delisted with everyone else? Right. And that narrative has changed because the Pope, Vitalik, made his comment, true liberty cannot be achieved without privacy. Right. There's a lot of buzzwords around Zk proofs, etc. So people are becoming more aware of that narrative. It's not been so hyped yet that, we're seeing as, everyone's suddenly into DeepIn or something like that. There is a quiet movement that we've done, and we have our DCC Alliance, for example, and this is where other privacy-focused or confidential computing-focused projects exist to co-promote, because there are different philosophies around privacy. For example, we're TEE, so Trusted Execution Environment, but there are others that believe in other, so ZK Rot, ZK Proof, etc. So we believe that it's a broad enough church that there's enough for everyone, because this is an important part of every single project in some way. Right. And so that's what we're all about. And I think I've always had this philosophy, is like, we can build, and if you go to any Web3 conference, you've got lots of people that are building things that really interest them, but they've got a very small circle.
Limited audience to give
exactly.
it to.
Right. Whereas Muhdo hits that box that if I was to explain it to my dad, who's 75, he's about to do a test because we believe his cellular age is a lot younger. Right. We'll see. But he understands it straight away. Like he can go, oh, well, I'd like to know what I should be eating because I'm 75 now and I'd like to feel a bit healthier, or I'd like to know what I'm doing to prolong my life as long as possible and make sure that I can continue to be active, see the grandkids, do all the rest of it. He would then, if I was to explain to him Bitcoin, he still doesn't understand it. Right. And as you often say, you're building a business on blockchain. You're not building a blockchain business. And this is what I've always said from day one, is we need to find those businesses built on blockchain, because that's where the real fun happens, because we all know the benefits of the technology, but the general public don't, or nor do they give a give two craps about it.
Right.
So it's hit that box, and in fact, it's almost changed our philosophy for the Builders Programme. If we're looking at our thesis,
Nice.
we want projects now that my mum will understand, because that's where adoption happens.
Right.
For example, we're working with another one. It's a private browser. They you know, it just keeps you safe. My dad was a victim of a phishing attack, so he knew that would be something that could benefit. But then it's the barrier to entry as well.
Yeah.
What is the user flow that people are used to? What do people do? So your
Just
whole
that interface as well.
Absolutely.
So it has to be familiar.
and you have that Web 2 application. This is the thing, the journey for your users. And this is when we were looking at the user stories. We said your journey for your Web 2 users is almost identical as your Web 3 users.
Right.
And that's it, because there's no barrier to entry. There's nobody having to sort of figure out. Because I remember first buying Bitcoin and first buying Ethereum, and I was sort of scrabbling around Googling, like, how do I buy this stuff? It wasn't immediately obvious. It was a pain. I remember giving someone a wallet because he wanted to be paid some Bitcoin, and I installed it on his computer. He was a Mac user. He's like, oh my God, get rid of it. It's going to give me a virus, because it just all looks so horrible.
Yeah.
So
I still hold my breath every time I send. Any kind of
Rings me up, make
It's
sure
horrible.
it goes through.
yeah, exactly. So that's it for us. So it is a dream project for us. And I think, you know, for us, it really has kind of drawn the line in the sand to say, this is what we're looking for. These are the projects. And in fact, when we are now assessing applications, but also as well, it also ticked the box because there's a big focus at Secret on confidential AI. Yep. So we're seeing a lot more now around data. So we're seeing a lot more sort of memos from companies saying, please let us know which large language models you're using. Because you're putting our company at risk. People are using note takers on mobile phones. So that's a big focus. So obviously knowing during the process of the project that there are other areas that we're focused on. It isn't just that abstraction of the wallets. It's actually then how do we engage with you on further stages of the roadmap.
So Adam, you just mentioned abstract the wallet, right? Is that what you just said? So could you just explain, because this is phase one, with what we're doing with the Secret Network, you've mentioned there the AI stuff, we can go into that a little bit later, but you just mentioned the first phase. Could you explain to someone that doesn't understand all of this technical language that we've been talking about, what is the benefit and the first level of technology integration into the Muhdo application that we're doing with Secret?
Okay, so I'll throw that back to you. So what did your user do on the Web3 experience?
Well, I mean, from the... fuck you, Joe. Fuck you.
So one of the cases that we wanted to kind of address is how do we get people to take part in clinical studies that might be used for product development, that might be used for future kind of preventative healthcare? How do we make them feel comfortable with sharing that information? Because, I mean, I listened to a Stephen Fry interview and he was talking about you might have a really horrible wart somewhere and you don't want to show your best friend that. But you will go to a doctor because you've got confidence in that doctor and keeping that information private and secure, but also giving you the right information back. So with Muhdo's consent to earn protocol, we wanted to be able to reward anyone all around the world for taking part in helping us develop fantastic products like the ones you see here. And coming into contact with Secret, we were like, hold on, is this the play? Is this how we do it?
And that's it. We have this editable privacy. That's what we call it. So you're able to decide whether you show that on the blockchain or not. So you could have it showing, or you can choose not to have it showing. You opt in and out of privacy. This is a big focus on what we say, because the same way as that if I'm an exhibitionist and I want to stand with the curtains open as I get changed, that's my choice. However, if I do want to draw the curtains, that's another choice. So think about the optional privacy as that. You can opt in and out of privacy. So your users can kind of get the benefits of seeing that. I always talk about this if people are asking me about Muhdo. I always think about affiliates. So if you're working as an affiliate and you go through the process of claiming your reward, you do an online submission basically, and then you wait for the wire transfer. Whereas, there's the ability here for that instant settlement, which everyone enjoys on the blockchain, or near instant settlement, and actually proof of reserves, for example. But you don't necessarily want to see where that transaction is going because it might identify, as you say, to a herpes group, as Sam often uses the analogy. And that's sensitive information. We don't necessarily want to shout to our network. You might do. got people that talk about it. As I'm
Some
getting
people are comfortable with it.
I've got
some
neighbours,
people
yeah,
aren't.
I've got getting into my mid to late 40s. I've got a lot of people that like to talk to me about their ailments now.
Yeah.
My back's gone. It only gets worse, by the way. But most people, and it's that right, and privacy is a right, and it's a choice. You know, we might choose if you're,
Right.
you know, so that's the most important part for us. And I think it's such a simple case study.
Yeah.
Right.
But it makes so much sense that it actually simplifies what we do at the network. And there's another reason that we're very proud of Muhdo, because it just makes sense.
Yeah.
I was at a hackathon and we've got people that build all sorts of things, you know, using our technology. And, you know, it's something that said, you know, we had one guy that had submitted, essentially, it was like a Snapchat for medical records. So somebody sends it over and it disappears after 30 minutes. You can program the privacy into it appearing for 30 minutes or 2 reads, 3 reads, or, you know. So it then, that was directly from a conversation talking about another application, because we said, well, this is what this real world project's doing. And he went, oh, okay. So light bulb came on.
Right.
And so it's you know, this is what we say, is that then we create these case studies that encourage other builders. And I think the use case is so simple in many ways, but it is just somebody opting whether they show what they're.
And I think when we've explained it to our community, and you know, everyone's got it straight away. Everyone's like, oh yeah, that works, that figures out. And we've got so many people that have joined the Muhdo community that are first time into the Web3 environment because they understand the problem that we're trying to solve. Like you said, you explained to your father and your neighbor, people get it. People get healthcare. And I think this side of blockchain is really one that's kind of bridging the gap between Web 2 and Web 3.
Exactly. And I think, you know, we used the analogy earlier, you know, there is a lot of reason that, you know, a permanent record of transactions is important. You know, a ledger is an incredibly important thing.
Hieroglyphics.
Yeah, exactly. But there's also reasons that you don't want to show that
Absolutely.
information. And so, you know, as I say, as we're driving adoption and we do speak to, you know, fund managers, etc., they do worry about the privacy side of things.
Yeah.
And that's where we come in, almost in the enterprise side of what we're doing, is that we can give that that assurance that things aren't going to happen. I mean, we're working on another project again with a publicly listed company, and this is around in proof of concept that we recently announced, which was around health tracking data and those records and who can shoot, so we can program the privacy, who has access to those records. So master admin, employee, not Dave on the street, you know.
There's someone's just not dipped into
Exactly,
it.
yeah. We've also, I remember early in the days talking about people going, oh, you just need like a password protected spreadsheet. It's like, oh, you're not really getting this, are you?
Yeah.
but so it made a lot of sense for us. So program of privacy to make sure.
And I think like where that data is being pulled from and that information, with the rise in AI and ChatGPT and all of that kind of stuff, people want to understand who's accessing that information and is that information being kept private, right?
Right, 100%. No, I think what you guys are solving a massive problem in Web3, and I think ultimately, until this problem is solved,
we're not going to see real adoption. I agree with you 100%.
So as a Muhdo Hub customer, you'll be using your application, you've submitted your health data, your epigenetic records are on there. We work with a number of different universities, 350 clinics and hospitals around the world, and that data is really interesting for them to help create preventative healthcare, medicines, vitamins, supplements, and you might get the opportunity to be part of one of these studies and be rewarded for that. Muhdo always feels like it's not our health data, it's the customers, and we are just the custodians of it. And we want to help these communities monetize that information where there's a lack of kind of insight and knowledge in that space. So you get a push notification, it says, hey, Sam, you've been selected to be part of a herpes
He always
study.
picks
I always pick Sam, yeah.
So stop using the herpes one.
No, it's all right.
We start to think he's hiding
I've
something.
already got through that.
So the push notification comes up and says you're going to be rewarded $1,000 in DNA for taking part in this study. Now, how does Secret play a part in that?
So if we're thinking about the user experience, we're thinking about their wallet, right?
Yeah.
We might not call it that in the app because wallets are often confusing, but the interface that they see their rewards. What Secret will do is allow that user to be able to decide whether that account is viewable or the amount is viewable, or the transaction is viewable. So it's programmable privacy, it's editable privacy, if you like. So you can choose whether you want to see it or not. So it gives that greater degree of protection that although they know that the treasury exists, if you like, that is going to pay out, they're not revealing their information. And I think that's vital.
But how does that look to the blockchain detectives, where every single interaction on the blockchain, you can track it. How do you make that private then?
You just won't see it.
Just won't see it.
And it's gone.
Okay. Then could you explain that?
I probably couldn't. I mean, think about it like wrapped. So it's wrapped,
Right.
if you like. So yeah, that's essentially how it works.
Okay, so a transaction will still be visible on chain. It will just be wrapped, or it will just completely be.
Well, you just wouldn't know. It's just going to appear from one place to another.
Yeah.
It's that simple. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's really important because you don't want to self-identify. You don't necessarily want to see what other tokens people have got in your wallet. And if the whole community and the whole world knows that Muhdo's taking part in these health studies and they're paying $1,000 a person, I mean, some of the ones that we've looked at are over $100,000 a person. I mean, it's crazy that these big companies are keeping all of that revenue for themselves and not rewarding people. It's so important that A, we show people who's mining that data, but then B, give them the option to take those rewards in privacy, no matter where you're located in the world, no matter what we're studying and looking into.
Yeah, I think if we move into the future, and depending on what podcast you listen to or what you're reading, when we move into the age that we're going into, data is going to become one of the most important commodities that we own, not what big companies own.
Right.
And if you went really far down a certain rabbit hole and people talk about things like universal basic income, you start to become your own source of extra revenue.
Yeah.
Right.
I'm not saying that's necessarily going to happen, but I think it's an important sort of line in the sand that controlling your data, being able to control the access, because good quality data is increasingly important. We know that I've seen large language models that have been trained that suddenly develop some sort of racial bias because of the data that they've been honestly. So good quality data, where does data come from? And we are a fantastic source of data, especially when we're thinking about medical data.
Yep.
Right. For example, if you're the same way if you have a certain blood type, your blood is more valuable into the ecosystem, although you're not rewarded for it.
Right.
But you are encouraged to give blood. So if you suddenly have people you can be very interesting, and also your improvement over time. So the data that you're getting, especially if you're taking 3-4 tests a year, you're creating incredibly interesting data for people.
100%.
And so when it comes down to the training of AI, for example, you're democratizing it. It's not just it's siloed off and you sign that disclaimer at the bottom that says, we own this now.
Yeah. We will never own it. We will never let the back end come onto our platform and take that data away. We'll only ever let it get mined, and we will do everything to ensure that privacy is the biggest factor. We never want to know that your information's being studied, mine or someone else's, and vice versa. That person wants to make sure they get their rewards.
100%.
And that's why I asked that question, by the way, because one of the things that we do here is that on every transaction, whether it's your data, whether it's purchasing a product or a subscription, 30% of that revenue always goes back to the DAO, which is then distributed back through the token ecosystem. So that's why when I was asking that question, I wasn't trying to be a dick. I just so that to the crypto detectives that are going to constantly be checking and making sure that those revenues are being allocated.
I know. Okay, so let's think about that different side of it. So
it was the balance between there's a transaction that's happened, I'm owed money, but then I don't want anyone to know that transaction was based on me having herpes.
Let's wind that,
which I don't.
What we can do
anymore.
I think. Okay, now I know where you're going. Let's rejig that.
Okay.
And what we're going to talk about is not necessarily because we've now got confused with what's happening on the public chain to what's happening to the user.
Yeah.
So I think what we need to say is go back to that and say, okay. I think the most important thing we focus on is the wallet.
Yeah.
But then we can talk about the data, and then we can talk about how valuable that data is, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah. Cool. All right. Well, you did the intro into that bit.
Which bit? The wallet.
Yeah. So talk about the wallet. So we talk about programmable, editable privacy. Okay. We just, in our minds, we just focus on the fact that the users can just protect their wallet value. That's the most important thing. So because you wanted to talk about on-chain detectives knowing that those rewards are going in, they will still see that because of your chain.
Right,
but Okay.
So let's talk about how do we balance the privacy with the transparency? Because with what we're building on every single transaction, whether that's data, whether that's supplements, whether that's subscriptions, 30% of that revenue automatically gets distributed to our DAO, which then reallocates that as per the votes of the DAO and how we've decided to do that. So I think where, we have to give transparency, but how do we balance the privacy side of that so that people know that the transactions have happened and that they're getting paid for the value that they're promised?
Yeah.
But ultimately, the information of where that transaction has come from remains private to the end user.
So if you think about it like this, in very layman's terms, you have a publicly viewable blockchain, right? People can go on with their Explorer, they can see what's happening. Brilliant.
Right.
They know that money is going out from the treasury. Fantastic. But what won't be shown is that the users have opted whether they're able to show their wallets on the chain. So they're hiding their wallets basically because there might be, they don't want to know who it is, because if you see a big wallet on any chain, you get those NFT attacks where people click on nefarious links that have been sent over because they're targeting Wales wallets. We all have those horror stories. So it's about that user protecting. But however, your governance on the blockchain, or showing that funds are being distributed, your detectives, as you say, can be able to see that that's happening. So it's not just that. The worst thing is ever see is when people come into try and start scam businesses on blockchains because they just lie. And then they create a record that proves that they're lying. What you can do is prove that you're telling the truth here, because you are distributing. You can't just say a number, because people will be able to go and look at it. But the user is safe. The user's rewards are safe, if that makes sense. So they've opted in whether they want to show or they don't want to show that information.
So ultimately then, just to keep it really simple, the proof of the transaction will be public, but who has received that, the person has the ability to abstract their wallet and keep that private.
For a soundbite, absolutely. And that's exactly it, is that you want to, because we talked about the affiliate model earlier. People go through this arduous process of claiming rewards. Blockchains are great for near instant settlement, right? But there's also reasons that, you wouldn't necessarily want to reveal, what your wallet balance is, for example. I think that's the genius of our collaboration here, is that, you can put your money where your mouth is as far as transactions and where the money's, that there's a treasury, etc. But the users are able to protect themselves. And I think that's the most important thing. That's when we started to talk about data as well, because the data that you're getting from your users is incredible. And so if we think about, again, depending on what podcast you're listening to, people start to talk about this kind of post-universal basic income or post-CBDC world, where your data is so important. And if we look at iterations, I don't want to go too hard down the rabbit hole of talking about, you jaywalk in China and the fines in your bank account before you've even finished it, etc., etc. But we do live to a world where, your data becomes one part of your net worth. When I looked at Brave, for example, for the first time, that I was able to opt in and out of ads and be rewarded for doing that. It started to get me to think about the information that I'm giving away. The same as this. So, as I said to you earlier, if you're taking those data points that, someone is doing quarterly reports, quarterly assessments, even 2-year assessments, seeing the beginning and the end, you're creating incredibly valuable data, but that data or that value is passed back to the user. Which is just incredible.
I think you've mentioned data and the value in data, and I think that one thing that we're really, really interested in at the moment is what you guys are doing over there with the secret AI. And it'd be great if you could explain that to people that are watching now.
Yeah, so I think the big problem with AI, we've seen a lot of memos coming from big companies, even small companies, reminding their employees of the risks that they're putting their companies at. We've seen reports of, security audits being written using ChatGPT. And what you're doing is you're training that large language model on your company's biases at that point, or weaknesses. We've seen reports from local authorities that social workers have written sensitive reports about, vulnerable families using ChatGPT.
Wow.
It's a big concern.
Slippery slope.
So what we've done is we're looking now at, we've developed the ability for confidential AI, as we're calling it, and that allows the LLM to essentially be trained in trusted execution environments, which means they're trained privately. So we can then ensure that we're able to, give secure training of AI, and it's really important. One of the other areas that we've seen again is that there's more and more emphasis now on how widely adopted AI is, where people aren't kind of necessarily understanding. We've seen some big things recently about where the data from a certain platform is going, and when people have run analysis. So we're becoming more aware of how important this is, and that's simply what we're doing at the moment. We've set up an AI Builders program, for example, where we're looking at collaborating with different people building on-chain agents, for example. But what we've also seen is there's a big gold rush to this at the moment, and that AI narrative means that there's a lot of noise. And so we're associating ourselves with the right channel partners now to be able to do it. And actually, when we look at the future roadmap of what you're doing, working with you on this to be able to, again, keep that data
that's
confidential.
so important, that part, because for us, this data set that we've got, we've got over 75,000 customers' information already. We've got millions that are about to come on board as well. We can't give that in. We can't train a third-party AI on that, because that's our IP. That's how we're creating these products.
Exactly.
So having, secret AI and making sure that, other AI agents can't go and learn from you and take that IP elsewhere, so important.
And I think just to add to that as well, I mean, we always talk to our community about how we're going to monetize their data and how we're going to give them value back. And John just hit the nail on the head. We're approached by AI companies now nearly weekly. We have AI companies, look, hey, let's do a partnership, because they're running out of Google. They've absorbed everything in Google, and actually our data with those time-stamped interventions is so valuable. And the problem that we've got is, on one side, we could create revenue for our community immediately by letting these AI agents be trained on that data. But the second that we do that, it becomes a risk to us, because we've built an interface for researchers. So researchers that want to come in, query the data, they will never have access to that. But with AI, it's a little bit different in how we can allow that data to be used to train. And obviously, as a business, we want to keep a competitive edge, which is why we're the best test in the market, because we've never sold that data and we've used it to optimize it. But I think with what you guys are doing there, it creates that opportunity for us to actually work with third parties, secure the data, and actually develop more products with other companies as well.
100%. And that's what it's all about, is that data, you used to get it thrown around all the time. People say data is the new oil. Funnily enough, when people then started talking about AI at a wider narrative, once people started to see the GPTs, etc., and they started to say, well, data's not the new oil. I said, well, it is. Because you're only as good as the data you're trained on.
Absolutely. That's so important.
It is. And I mean, I used the analogy. There was, without naming names, there was an LLM that was trained essentially using data from a certain region, and they found that the LLM had certain racial biases because of where it was trained.
There's a mortgage company doing the same thing, trying to solve that issue, where lenders have a bias, right? So use an AI model that's completely unbiased, right? And then you get a better result. It's so important that what data the LLM is trained on is critical.
You're only as good as the data. It's like all of us. We're only good on the data that we're fed. And I think that's the thing. It's artificial intelligence. It's therefore, you know, it needs to be trained. If we train it on shoddy data, you're going to get shoddy results. But taking control of that data is the most important thing. Absolutely. And I think people are realising that more and more. And as we see to things like data bonds now, that's how, when we can actually start to get data. I don't know, I use this analogy all the time. Manchester United Football Club added to their valuation by adding their training data. So you can add to your sort of balance sheet. Which is crazy. And more and more companies are doing that, which just shows how valuable data actually is. When we're taking data, I've worked with data companies before, and you have to clean the data and all the rest of it. But once you've got that pure data and you can start to use it, it's incredibly valuable.
So how would Secret AI, how would that fit in then? Just for people, to explain that really simply.
Yeah. So when you are working on, your large language model, essentially, you're working with us to actually, if you're using it, even with one of the other ones, you can use a snippet of code. Or you could be using our APKs, etc. So that means that we're able to effectively allow that confidential training, access to the right equipment, machinery, machines. I always get that bit wrong. Start again. Because I shouldn't say machinery. Yeah.
So working with Secret AI, how would that benefit us as a business, being able to work with third parties that wanted to use our data, but we obviously would be able to keep that secure and private from being...
Really simply, it's trained in a completely private way. So it's trained within a TEE, trusted execution environment. So it's not leaked out there. It exists. It's siloed, if you like. So you have control over it.
Right.
So therefore, when you're looking at your data and you do want to work with a third party, you can choose what you share with them.
Right.
Because of that protection, if you like. That's a very simple way of
It's
putting
like
it.
consent to learn
Yeah.
for AI.
100%.
Really cool. Really,
Yeah,
really
I like that, John. That sounds like a new tagline.
quick.
No, but it's important because like once you give that raw data away, then it's gone.
Yeah.
You've completely devalued that data, and that for us just doesn't make any sense.
And also isolating the data that it's mining from and getting the knowledge from as well. Because
Right.
you take a ChatGPT, for example,
Right.
you ask it for a fitness plan. 10 minutes later, you ask again, you get another version of it, right? It's
Yeah.
only as good as the prompt that you give it to try and keep it accurate. So isolating where it pulls that information,
Yeah.
allowing it consent to a certain data set means
Right.
you're going to get way more accurate results from that AI as well, right?
Yeah, and that's it for us. The whole journey with Muhdo is, there's the first stage, which is that. But actually, when we looked at your whole roadmap of where your product's going,
Yeah.
we could see all these other value adds that we could support. And I think that's it. We want long-term relationships. We want to grow with companies. We want to make sure that we're there on the journey, making sure we're supporting them, because you're only as good as your last business. You're only as good as your last project. People could live off the glories of whatever happened previously on a chain. If it doesn't work anymore, it doesn't work if it's not operational. So, being able to have a long-term roadmap as well as a short-term one is really important for us. And actually, the kind of whole secret AI thing was being talked about, but it wasn't live when we started the journey. But actually now it's like, okay, well, what's the next step, guys?
Yeah.
Because this is operational, we can show these numbers on chain, but actually what's the next stage? And then secret AI plays a part in that as well.
No, I love it. You guys are solving problems so we don't have to solve those problems, which is great. And I see a big opportunity working with you guys on the AI piece because, like I said, we're getting calls all the time from AI companies that want to work with our data, and we don't really want to work with everyone. We want to work.
And the blockchain gives us the trust in you guys as well, how it's
100%.
being used, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's really fascinating for me. Like I said, if having this coach, I think for me, is such a big product sell. We're always looking for things that are sticky, like stick to us. They make life easier. They become, I always use the analogy. It's like, you Google something, you might not use Google. You just use it as your default for web browsing, or if you have something like a Tannoy system, it's really an announcement system. Tannoy's a brand. But actually, I think being able to, I think what you're doing with the health coach and the AI health coach, it just becomes this thing that that is so flat. And we look for that adoption that, it's kind of push reminder to do something, day by day. This is what you do.
Step by step.
We all need that, and I think
it's like having a little personal trainer in your
yeah,
pocket.
exactly.
Don't
It's
do
your
just a
personal
reminder.
trainer, it's your nutritionist, it's your mindful coach, it's your doctor, it's your mental health consultant.
Yeah, exactly,
It's a little
that.
bit of everything.
Yeah, exactly.
And I always need a little gentle reminder and a gentle push, and it's always easier going to the gym with a friend or something like that.
Yeah,
Having this in your
100%.
pocket is that little friend, is that little nudge, and is that little...
And people are used to it now. If you go to the gyms, everyone's got those AI workout apps. Everybody's now starting
Tracking
to follow
data.
those apps.
20 years ago, you'd never think that everyone would be sitting here with, fitness watches, Whoop devices, tracking their steps, like everything. We're tracking, right? To improve and optimize our health. And I think the blockchain and what we're doing now is like the next wave of that in adoption.
Well, we're back to data again. All these devices are gathering incredible data, and we need to take control of that data.
Absolutely.
We need to be able to consent to that data, and that's where we can add real value. And sure, you might be somebody that wants to go back to the dark ages a little bit and just sit in a cave and not have any connected devices. Fine, but but at least if we're going to give it away, we can give it away for a value that's good for us. And I think that's a philosophy that we believe in with you guys.
Yeah, I think that's a really good place to end that.
Yeah. Well, no, I would just add that we've just completed phase 1 of our integration with the secret network, with the wallet, and with the privacy aspects. There's a lot more stuff that we're working on with secret network that we're going to be rolling out over the coming months as we develop our tech stack. We've maybe alluded to some of the stuff in the conversation, but there's a lot more than that. The Builders program for us has introduced us to a ton of partnerships, tier 1 partnerships, and we're about to announce our latest partnership introduced through the Secret Builders program that's bringing in the fintech integrations into the applications where, you know, we're trying to just keep it so streamlined between Web 2 and Web 3. And yeah, the stuff that we're going to be doing with you guys is really exciting, and that announcement's coming out pretty soon. So on camera, we'd just like to thank you, Adam, because you keep adding value to the ecosystem.
People invest in people, as I say. And you guys are, you know, for me, it's a project that's very close to my heart. I think and I don't say this lightly. I think our association with you, the fact that I've even done a test, the fact that it's made me think differently. Yeah. It's good to get involved in projects that actually change your life.
Could you give some feedback on that test?
So I discovered I'm older than I actually am. I discovered certain things about my coffee consumption, for example.
Right.
I won't talk about some of the other consumptions, but you know, there were certain things that have made me think very differently.
Right.
And we were talking about eye health earlier. I've had like more floaters in my eyes forever. They said, well, eventually you might need some sort of operation. I went for an eye test very recently, and everything was much better than it was. I'd gone from short-sighted to just needing reading glasses. Now, your eyesight changes.
And that's because you took the supplements that were recommended?
Who knows? But it's strange because it did happen. So I've been used to my eyesight deteriorating.
Right.
And I was always concerned. I'm not wearing glasses now. If you'd seen me maybe a year ago, I might have been wearing glasses depending on whether I was tired or not. But I generally feel more awake. I'm sleeping better. My magnesium is up, and I think that's just been the wonder supplement for me because I wake up refreshed.
Right.
I don't wake up craving fatty foods anymore. I don't wake up thinking about the right thing. But I think it's important, and actually to get involved in a project at any level where you can see this will change lives.
Right.
My son has certain health problems. Thinking about what's causing those, not that, you know, it's made me think very differently about how I respond to a doctor, for example. The preventative medicine piece is incredible, and I feel happier and healthier than I have done in a long time because it's kind of led me to thinking differently. And I think that's the most important thing. I think as humans, we're sometimes like, okay, it's time to wave the flag in a little bit more. Or you go full mad at the gym.
You admit it, don't you? You're like, it's all over.
I've given up now. Yeah. You know, you just become, you know, one of these older people you see at the gym that just think being on the treadmill all day is going to prolong their life somehow. And then you see them in the cafe and having a bacon sandwich. It helps find balance. And I think life is all about balances.
Right.
Yeah.
And it's also about making the right choices. And I think being able to see an MOT certificate, if you like, and that's the way I was thinking about it, to say, okay, well, you know, I need to put...
You're not a write-off yet.
Yeah. I need to put this petrol in. You know, I need to upgrade my petrol. I need to make sure I'm doing oil changes more regularly. You know, it just prolongs the life of your vehicle, and that's the only way I can describe it when people have spoken to me about it. But also as well, from an adoption point of view, I can explain to my dad what it was. And I've mentioned that before, but for me, if I can prolong his life for longer... Yeah, that's just incredible.
Amazing.
Yeah, exactly. You know, having two young kids as well at a later age, you know, they wear you out. And I feel now more active as a dad, and that's so important. So health is your most important asset. We know that. I think, but we take that for granted sometimes.
Right.
And so it's making me think very differently about life in general. And I think that's the crazy part. So to even play a small part in that is quite incredible for me, because if you'd said to me a year ago, we'd be sitting having this conversation, and it had come directly through, I would have said, okay, sounds good. Yeah. Sounds all right, yeah. Will it happen though? And actually now we're sitting believing in something that I wasn't even aware of, 12 months ago.
I mean, I always look at this more as a lifestyle platform backed by science. Yeah. It's showing you what is wrong in your lifestyle and how to improve that. And then typically, like, you're a great example because you took the steps to improve it, and now you're feeling better, you're looking better, everything's working better, and then you start to believe the science. So as you go on this journey with us, you take more tests and you start to see that. You know, I think that's really what the mission is about, is getting people to, first of all, understand, then feel and see the results of these products. And there's not many companies out there that give you a free test to subscribe to a product that's going to validate that product.
Yeah, exactly. And I do have a bone to pick with you because I just bought a really expensive coffee machine before. And it's not used half as much as it should be. I was wondering if we'd do refunds.
Let's go.
I mean, do you know what? I didn't want to do my test for ages. I
was scared.
I didn't
people
want
always
to
say
do
that
it.
they're scared, right?
I was petrified, I must admit. But it's kind of, face the fear. And I was like, well, I'd rather know. Because I've always been like, I'd rather not know. I'd rather, I was always of the philosophy, I'd rather be hit by a bus tomorrow than, know that I was going to die in 6 months' time. It was always that kind of, but facing the fear.
Yeah.
And we're giving you like a little bit of guidance on how to just keep pushing it out.
Yeah, exactly.
We're not trying to solve everything. We're just kind of pushing
in the right direction. But as I said to you in the lift, you're feeling healthier gives you a chance to focus on other things. It gives you a better focus.
Improves your mental health.
Yeah, it does. And actually it's sort of taken me more on a kind of, thinking about life very differently, maybe in a spiritual sense. But that's because I could focus, and I realised that I'd get very tired in an afternoon, and I'm like, oh God, I'm going to lie down or something, I've got so much energy now, and it's not fake energy. It's not energy that I've just had an espresso and I want to charge about a bit or go on the punch bag or, anything like that. But it is natural energy. And I think that's the most important thing for me. I think it's just boosted to the stage where I know that I can continue through the day, and it's not like I need a coffee now or I need a Ripple or something.
Right.
I've never been a big energy drinker, but I was always a big coffee drinker. And I'd find that as an adult and a parent, I'd always say, I can still have coffee at 6 and sleep at night because my kids are wearing me out.
Right.
Now I have natural energy throughout the day.
Yeah.
And that's by deciding how I do it. It's also given me a change in how I think about food. I won't big up other brands, but there are food replacements that I'm using now because I aren't looking for a carb craving to give me energy, for example. I'm happy to have, a food replacement, which again is organic and natural, etc., because I'm not craving the bad things to keep me going.
Yeah.
Right.
Some people have a Mars bar or a chocolate bar just to give them that boost. I don't need that anymore.
Right.
And I think that's an important thing as well.
Yeah.
It makes you think differently. And also as well, I think that you can almost taste better afterwards as well. I don't know if that's proven or there's any study, but you do start to taste when you're tasting food, because obviously the reason food has flavours is to tell us what we're missing, right? So we crave something because we need it.
Right.
I'm craving better food now. And
Right.
I think that's really important as well.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
No, I'm super happy, like really happy. I mean, there's nothing better than actually seeing people's really...
proof's in the pudding, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Yeah.
And my dick grew 10 inches.
Only 10.
I was going to say.
He's only got one leg.
Definitely leaving that in.
Definitely leave that in.
Yeah, since I did my DNA test, I get laid 5 times a day. My penis has grown.
The sales.
And I've won the lottery.
Awesome. Well, guys, that is it. That is Muhdo episode 2. Thank you so much for Adam from the Secret Network coming down, Sam and myself. Check out Secret on X, on Telegram, join their community.
There's going to be a lot more announcements from the Secret Network and Muhdo coming up over the next couple of months. As we said earlier, we've just integrated the secret privacy features into our application, which is now at beta. So we'll be testing that over the next 4 to 6 weeks before we go mass market. But there's some clues in the program as to what else we're going to be working on together. And there's some other fintech integrations that will be developed over time. So where we've started at phase 1, this is just the beginning of Muhdo Hub and Secret Network. So there's going to be a lot more updates as we go along.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Cheers, guys.